Elvis is directed by Baz Luhrmann and stars Austin Butler, Tom Hanks, and among others. And this is the biographical film about the King, Elvis Presley, and his life and also story involving with his relationship that deals with not only his rise in fame as, the famous musician that we know and love, but also that we know as part of history, but also his relationship that also grows with not only his family, but also his manager that comes across, played by Tom Hanks, Colonel Tom Parker. And in this story, it also kind of takes on the perspective of Colonel Tom Parker for quite a bit, as we start to see things under his perspective of how he's telling the tale. And a lot of the things that Elvis got his start in, and a lot of things that Colonel Tom Parker had basically led his career into. Now, here's a little backstory. Now, this is a film directed by Baz Luhrmann, who I haven't really quite seen much of his movies. Like, the only one I've really fully watched is William Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet, which I really love. And I've seen bits and pieces of Moulin Rouge, but I never finished it. And I was, for a long time, going to watch The Great Gatsby adaptation they did back in 2013, but I never got around to it. But just seeing what I've seen with his previous films, including Romeo and Juliet and all that, he definitely does have a unique style that I really admire as a filmmaker. And coming into this movie, it got me really interested because not only am I a big fan of Elvis's music, but it actually kind of has on a personal level for me because my grandmother, may she rest in peace, on my dad's side, Granny, she idolized Elvis Presley a lot, and she had almost like all of his memorabilia and was like one of his biggest idols. And the movie does hold a lot of dear to me, and going into it and everything. And I can honestly say that this is definitely a movie that my grandmother definitely would have loved, absolutely. And upon seeing the film, I can honestly say I was very blown away by this. I think that it's definitely one of the best biographical biographical films based on a musician that I think I've seen since Rocket Man. And I mean that in a good way too, because kind of similar to Rocket Man, this one does kind of take a traditional route. Like, this does take its kind of traditional route with Rocket Man, with how it's telling the story of the kind of rise and fall of the musician, but also doing its kind of own spin to where it does have its structure, like in its own unique style, like similar to that film. While that movie was a musical, this one has it to where it takes the form of them doing like basically narrating throughout the movie, and a lot of ways that we see a different side of basically things that I to this day I didn't really realize about Elvis Presley until watching this film. And to get my pros out of the way, Austin Butler I thought was outstanding in this. Not only did he embody Elvis, and while he not only carried a lot of the mannerisms, a lot of the energy that Elvis had on stage, and also in the dramatic scenes, but the guy just had, like, in parts, like a very good very tremendous, performance that was not only so like on the near of Oscar level, but also you really feel bad for him throughout the movie, because there's a lot of things that Elvis is going through in his life that I'm not going to go into detail, but it does get pretty sad when you really know the story about it, especially when he gets into his later years involving with his manager. And it really sees a whole lot of things that come to light that makes you really, see things in a whole new level that I've never heard about until now with this movie. And Austin Butler really kills it. I think this is definitely, I haven't really seen much of the guy in other films. I've only seen him just in his role in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, and while I liked him in that movie, this is definitely his best movie I've seen him in so far. And I'm really hoping he goes places after this movie, because I think that he basically much like I had the praise with Taron Egerton and Elton John, he really captured Elvis to the T. And there are actually, and while he doesn't, have quite the look to him that, people think of him resembling Elvis, there are actual scenes in the film that it does look kind of uncanny, to where he does kind of look spot on in a couple of points. And I was like really surprised with how really kept to detail they made him look like Elvis in a couple of times. But despite him not looking like Elvis, he just had everything that I really enjoyed with his performance a lot with this. And from what I also heard was that there actually is quite a handful of scenes where he's actually doing his own singing and stuff. And I thought the guy did have a great voice, you know, capturing Elvis's persona and his singing vocals. And the other biggest praises I got to say too, the rest of the cast are great too. And while I did hear there's some controversy surrounding with Tom Hanks playing Colonel Tom Parker, with the way that he takes his accent, his Dutch, kind of, you know, doing this Dutch accent that they give him and everything. But yeah, I know it can really sound exaggerated, but I didn't really think it bothered me too much. In fact, I can actually really buy that it goes along with the movie, because, you know, there's just something about this kind of like character in a movie standpoint that it's the one that you kind of love to hate, where Tom Hanks is such a likable guy in a lot of movies, and see, it's very different for him playing a kind of character that is one that you kind of love to hate. And I think a good comparison like this, the way he's kind of like very, you know, kind of manipulative, and kind of the way that he's trying to draw people in, it is very similar to his like character and performance level, like the Lady Killers, in that he has that kind of, you know, charismatic and very, you know, kind of sophisticated side to himself that does really make people kind of, you know, he kind of has that way of luring people in and kind of tricking them at times. And so I really enjoyed him a lot in this movie. I thought he really nailed it. And then, you know, the other biggest standpoints I got to enjoy the most is the style in this, because the musical numbers, especially with hearing familiar beats of Elvis's music, was not only fantastic, especially hearing, you know, great songs like Suspicious Minds, you know, just a lot of his classic tunes that I really do loved and admire with. I just couldn't get enough of it, and it has such a great, you know, kinetic and very energetic feel to it. And when it gets to some of the later stuff that really goes to more of the like live on stage kind of performances, it really had me on the floor. And when I was in the audience, I was with my parents and going to the theater with my mom and dad. Like, my mom and dad couldn't get enough of it. Like, they were almost, you know, they were kind of like, you know, dancing around and everything like that. And I just, man, I really wish my grandmother could have been there for this movie, especially in a very big packed theater for this, because this is definitely one movie that's worth it alone, especially for the musical in the musical parts. But just the drama itself and the way that it plays along, I really enjoy where the story was winning, because a lot of the things that we start to get more into Elvis's life, it really does seem like they were really trying to spin more on the main points of his career. And while there's some other stuff that I kind of thought that they could go probably a little bit more into detail with, that I'll kind of get into just my little minor nitpicks, especially when we get to some of his later parts, I did feel like the way the movie was going and with his career, it really worked, and you really feel the emotions going with Elvis and a lot of the things that we also would later know about him later in life. And then one of the other biggest things I really got to appreciate is the production design is fantastic, especially the very, you know, the way it captures a lot with the different decades he's going through, with the 40s, 50s, you know, and almost everywhere up until the 70s and everything. I just thought was very spot on. And I got to really appreciate the way that the movie was, you know, not going to spoil anything, but let's just say there's a nice little thing that they do at the end that, well, I can honestly say that I can't really, that I was almost on the verge of tears. And my mom, like, when she was with me watching it, she did actually kind of almost cried at the end. Especially there's something I can't really go into detail, but it did get to her. And so that was really great. And then other than that, though, I really don't have much flaws with this movie. I mean, the only kind of minor things I would say, just as a minor, just they could have added more, because there is some things they don't really spend like a whole lot of time with, even though the movie does feel like it's, you know, going almost 2.5 hours. It never felt that way. I was never bored by it. It actually goes by pretty fast, and I barely even noticed the runtime. But there's some things that they could have maybe like kind of took more basis on. Like, okay, we could have maybe spent a little bit more time trying to, you know, see like what his like film career and stuff was like, you know, and we could have maybe heard some other classic songs that I thought that they were kind of getting into. Just little minor things, you know, like we could have heard like Amazing Grace or things like that. Well, one of my other minor things I will say is that they could have avoided any rap music that does feel out of place in certain scenes. And I know that's what the director did with some of his other films, like he did with Great Gatsby, I heard. But for this, I did feel like there were a couple times it just kind of felt out of place and didn't really go with the actual scenes in the film. But other than those little kind of minor nitpicks, and also I heard that there's some things that they kind of left out as far as the real life story of important people in Elvis's life that they cut out completely, that I think probably could have added to the film. But those are just some really small things that didn't hold the movie back in any way for me. And with that, since I really love this movie a lot, it's definitely going to be one of the best films of the year for me. And with that, I'm going to give the film a phenomenal grade on the Film Freaks meter. So for those of you who have also seen Elvis, let me know in the comments below what you thought about it. And thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in my next review. I'll see you later.